Good morning. It's April 11th, 2022, and welcome to Triggered. Happy Monday, or not so happy, but hey, look on the bright side. This is a short week for most people due to Easter coming up this weekend. We won't be doing a show on Friday, just so you know, but there'll be lots of coverage, lots of things happening. Going tomorrow night to Pierre Poilievre's big to do at Spruce Meadows in Calgary, actually. That should be interesting. He's been really getting giant turnouts to his rallies across the country, and he really seems to have some momentum going on in that conservative leadership race right now. And we're starting to see the pushback. You know, the hard left. They're trying to say he's the new Trump. He's the new Trump. That's all they got. It's that's fine. You know, if they want to stay shallow and poor and trying to stop a good, solid conservative person from having a campaign, I think it's only going to backfire on them in the long run. So we'll talk a little more about that later, though. So this show, just to let you all know, is live, and it comes every day, Monday to Friday, aside from this Friday, as I said, at 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And I see the comments are already starting. The folks from out Blackfalds, Scott Campbell from Fort Mac, and a number of people popping in there. I like seeing the comments. I like seeing the interaction. That's the advantage of doing a live show. You know, we get some technical hiccups now and then, but we can still interact, get some things out to guests and things like that. And sometimes you guys ask me questions I never even would have thought of. So it brings the discussion along. So keep those comments coming, guys. I really appreciate them. Read them all, even if I don't necessarily respond to them all, and discuss things back and forth with each other. Just make sure to keep it civil, though. You know, we don't need to be at each other's throats. It's as I like to keep saying, take politics seriously. Don't take it personally, though. There's no sense attacking each other. We can differ without getting rude. It's possible. If you want to get a little more on the rude side, there's my Twitter account at the bottom, Cory B. Morgan. We can get a little more rough and tumble on there. It's a little more casual time for it. Of course, if you're too belligerent on there, well, I'll just ignore you there too. But we have a lot of means to communicate and talk about the subjects of this show and politics in general. And of course, send me guest ideas, commentary, things like that. Email them, tweet them to me. I appreciate them all. Okay, so I got a couple of great guests on today. I'm going to have, first of all, Brett Wilson. He's going to talk about Kenney's leadership review. He's going to give more of a counterpoint to where I'm coming from with things. He's quite supportive of Premier Kenney, and he wants Premier Kenney to pass in that review. So I want to offer some balance in here. We've really been beaten up on Kenney quite a bit around here, and in a lot of our columnists and our guests. So Wilson's going to offer a different point of view on that. Plus, we're going to have the Western Standard's Edmonton Bureau Chief, Rachel Emmanuel. She's been on here before. She was in Ottawa for some time. She moved all the way out west, and we have installed her in the legislature, and she's put in her first full week over there in that Edmonton Hornet's Nest. So we'll get a review and see what she saw and what she thinks of things up there right now. So to get things kicked off, though, a lot of provincial stuff today, as with Brett and Rachel. And here's where I'm sitting on things. There's a review. It's on for what it's worth. Premier Kenney kicked off the voting period for the latest version of the leadership review. He's been trying so hard to defer and avoid. And in the words of Rick Bell, he still just doesn't get it. I don't know what sort of speech could repair the divided UCP right now, but I do know that what Kenney delivered last weekend just wasn't it. Kenney needed some sort of barn burner, something to light the world on fire, turn the tide of party discontent, and he didn't deliver it. And perhaps no such speech exists. Maybe the party's just too far gone by now. The clock's ticking, and with each ballot mailed out, Kenney has less time to try and sway the opinion of his members. And while Kenney admits to having made mistakes, he still always follows with an excuse. There's little to be seen in the way of genuine contrition or any indication that Kenney really actually understands what's gone wrong and that he's going to be looking to change that. The case Premier Kenney and his dwindling number of defenders usually tends to make in support of keeping him as leader is that he's better than the alternative. Well, being less bad doesn't necessarily make you good. And Albertans are weary of years of bad politics. They really want something to vote for rather than against for a change. I mean, perhaps any other leader of the UCP would have acted the same way policy-wise these last 3 years, even with pandemic restrictions. I mean, while unpopular policy decisions clearly contributed to many of the UCP woes today, the problem runs deeper than policies themselves. The problem is a lack of confidence in the party's leadership. Members haven't been calling for a policy review. They've been calling for a leadership review. With the election of the UCP, Albertans were looking forward to more than just replacing the NDP. They wanted to see a government that reflected grassroots values and stands up for Albertans against Ottawa. Not Lee won power for a number of reasons, not the least of which, though, was Albertans were being They were sick and tired of the arrogant, out-of-touch progressive conservative government, and that government took their role for granted. Now, unfortunately, in a short 3 years, the Kenney government is looking and acting strikingly like the PCs of old. Introverted, top-down leadership is souring party members and Albertans alike. Instead of looking within and trying to understand why members within his own party have been turning on him, Kenney's been choosing to shoot outwards. He's labeling his opponents as extremists and kooks, and he even took part in labeling nomination contenders as racists. These are the actions we expect of the federal Liberal government. Kenney sounded a lot like Trudeau did when Trudeau was slandering the truckers' convoy participants, rather than at least listening to them with a modicum of respect. The internal political games and abusive party process stink to high heaven. Democratic nominations are blocked. The leadership review process has been altered so much that few people are even going to have faith in the outcome of it. Kenney and his supporters haven't tried to win the review through winning the hearts and minds of supporters, as much as they've been trying to win it through rigging the process. And Kenney just embraced an open review last fall when the rumblings of discontent were becoming persistent. He could perhaps have gotten to work on healing internal rifts within his party enough to have survived such a vote. But now this trust is really utterly broken. I wish I could say otherwise, but I just don't see a good outcome in this leadership review. I mean, while Kenney claims he's the only one who can bring unity to the party, I just can't see how. Kenney claims he only needs 50% plus one in order to have a mandate. Look, if Kenney gets anything less than 75% support, this party's going to tear itself to shreds. And if he gets anything more than 75% support, nobody's going to believe the numbers. Kenney's main party problems are internal. His own MLAs and constituency associations have turned on him. If Kenney remains as a leader, it's without question that a number of MLAs are going to be crossing the floor and taking their constituency support with them. Our legislature will look much like it did shortly before Notley took power in Alberta, which is distressing to say the least. One valid question Kenney supporters are asking is, if not Kenney, then who? And while there might not be a clear contender for the throne evident right now, the party can't remain crippled for lack of one. While members don't know yet who can lead their party successfully, they've got a pretty good idea now who can't. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I wish it was otherwise. I'd hoped that Kenney would usher in a decade of responsible conservative government in Alberta. Reality has to be faced now, though. All Kenney can offer is continued top-down leadership fostering division while the UCP support levels swirl the drain. Let's hope the members vote wisely in this review and then vote wisely again when they choose a new leader for the UCP. That's where I'm sitting on this whole mess right now. Let's check in with our news editor, Dave Naylor, and see what else is happening out there in the news world in Alberta and Canada. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
It's going good, Cory. How was your weekend?
It was all right. Busy. A lot of running around.
I don't want to blow your cover as a grumpy old guy, but I heard you did a good thing on the weekend. Saved the life of or helped save the life of a dog, possibly.
I don't know if I go that far, but yes, Jane and I went out and picked up an animal for the Rescue Society we volunteer for, and it was unfortunately very decimated. It hadn't been fed, and it was in terrible condition. We did pick it up, and we dropped it off with a foster home in Olds that actually are taking really good care of her, and she's going to be doing really well. But unfortunately, we got some people who just don't treat animals very well, and that's one of the things we like to volunteer to try and ease that whenever we can.
You're a big old softy, aren't you, Cory?
I don't know about that. I love animals. I just got no use for people.
Exactly. I feel the exact same way. So anyway, leading off the top of the news this hour, we've got a federal adjudicator who has ruled that the Treasury Board was wrong to force staff to use up all their sick leaves and use up all their vacation days before they were allowed to go on COVID furlough. This was a program that had already cost $1.3 billion, and I guess they were trying to save some money, but a adjudicator has shot them down. One of our columnists, Barbara Kay, has written about the Arctic and how Russian nutcase Vladimir Putin may turn his eyes towards Canada's Arctic when he's done with the Ukraine. And speaking of the Ukraine, Premier Kenney announced today that the Alberta government was terminating relationships with 3 regions within Russia. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the names, but they were all sister regions, and Kenney has terminated it, saying the Russian aggression is outrageous and cannot be tolerated. What else we got on the go? We've got a report that looked into the overall well-being of the Canada tax revenue people, and it didn't come out very well. They found some managers were drinking on company time, and the tax man is just basically not an overly healthy department. So that was interesting. And we've got the Saskatchewan Health Minister, Merriman. He was sick, admittedly sick last week, and wasn't around all week. But he refused to say whether or not it was COVID. And the leader of the opposition says, "Well, that's silly. He should say it. If it was COVID, it's it's a teaching point, an educational thing." So, and we've got a survey on Canadians' attitudes on the pandemic, and the majority of people feel the pandemic is here to stay, and we've just sort of got to learn to live with it. So, that's some of the stuff we've got up at the moment. Cory, we're moments away from publishing a Pierre Poilievre story where he's in Vancouver and looking at Vancouver house prices and basically coming up with his plan on how he would try and make housing more affordable for Canadians. And there's a good informative video to go along with that. So I'll be hitting the publish button on that ASAP.
Okay, well, we'll keep watching for the stories as they come out. The Poilievre one is always of interest. Of course, for everybody watching, make sure you're finished with the show first before clicking on these stories, but there's plenty of them out there. Thanks for checking in, Dave. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Cory.
So yes, that was our news editor, Dave Naylor, and he is responsible for that news content that is always going out there. And there's a lot. It's going up fast and hard and heavy. Today, hasn't been a crazy news day for a number of things, but we still got a lot of stuff to look at and into. And I'd just like to remind everybody, the reason we can do that, the reason we have these reporters, the reason Rachel's out in Edmonton now, and we have Matthew in Ottawa, and Chris out in Saskatchewan, we got Reed out in BC. We are covering this country and expanding, and I got to thank all of you subscribers for that. That's the only way we can do it. The only reason it's working is because you guys have reached in and shelled out $10 a month or $99 a year to help keep us rolling, and that keeps us accountable to you. I mean, if our content stinks, you guys will drop off. And obviously, we've been putting some stuff out that some people appreciate, and we appreciate you guys. If you haven't subscribed already, though, I got to remind you, take out a subscription, get to westernstandardonline.com, and hey, use that coupon code TRIGGERED. You can see right there. You'll save another $10 on your membership fees. Well worth it. It's a good deal, cheaper than an old newspaper subscription, and it keeps us rolling. We'll get more reporters. We'll get out and cover things. Like I said, a bunch of us are going out to Pierre Poilievre's thing tomorrow night. We're going to cover that and watch it. Maybe meet some of you guys out there. It sounds like it's going to be a big thing. I mean, his rallies have been huge. Leslyn Lewis has been holding some large ones as well. I don't know about Jean Charest. He came on. Again, credit where due. He came on our show. He talked to us, but I don't see him drawing really large crowds at rallies and things such as that. I don't know if he's really gaining the excitement of Canadians at this time. But the race is ongoing, and we're covering it as closely as we can. And we'll continue to. Another way we can cover these things, of course, and I'll get that going too, is our sponsors. And we've got a good one with bitcoinwell.com. These guys, you've heard me talk about them before. They're a Western Canadian company. They're publicly traded. They're trustworthy, because those are all very important things when we're talking about something you might want to do with your hard-earned money. You might want to get involved in digital currencies. You might want to get your money out of the reach of the banks, because they already showed that they will steal your money on behalf of the federal government if they are told to. They can't get at your Bitcoin wallet. There's some myths that they can. They can't, guys. It's separate. It's a part. You store it. You hold on to it. These guys show you how that all works. That's kind of what their role is. Bitcoin Well never has your money either. They are the facilitator. They'll show you how digital currencies work. They'll show you how you could set up your wallet, how you can use it. It's not just something to store money in and forget. As you can see, you can pay your bills, your credit cards. You can do things online with digital currencies, or as Pierre Poilievre showed a little while back, you can pay for your pizza in some restaurants with digital currencies. Get out there, check out bitcoinwell.com. They got a fantastic service, and perhaps digital currencies are for you. They will show you the way to get into it. Okay, so let's look into a few comments before I get on to my guest. Now, I as I said, I was giving Kenny a workout, as I have often, and many of our columnists have, and guests, but Brett Wilson, it was a recorded interview. It's hard to corner some people live every time, just so you know, if you're commenting and such. When I do run it, it was recently recorded. I talked with him, but I do want to get other points of view. We've got to have the discussion. We got to get it out there. And Mr. Wilson feels that people should give Kenney another chance and let him keep going through this review and carry on as a leader. So, we'll run that, and you can listen to that. Let's see, from Don saying the less of two evils is not acceptable way to vote. And that's kind of how I feel on it. I mean, Kenney's had 3 years to try and get it together. And unfortunately, he just hasn't won things out. And they constantly keep saying, well, it's not as bad as Notley. Well, not many would be as bad as Rachel Notley. I mean, people saying, well, you like Jean or you like Smith or what? I don't know. We'll see. But right now, how long does it have to go? How much does he have to keep spinning and twisting and changing the rules to try and hang in there? It's not adding to confidence for voters in general, if we're talking about election a year from now, or in the members. But we'll see. He's got a month to work on it. Members are mailing their votes, and we'll see what happens. But Mark asking, do I address his premier as His Excellency? And no, I don't think anybody does. The worst one we have in Canada when it comes to those honorifics, by the way, is usually with mayors when we call them Your Worship. If you ever heard me saying Your Worship, it was usually with a great degree of sarcasm when I was referring to Naheed Nenshi or his prodigy there with Gondek, Her Worship. I don't worship anybody, particularly politicians, and especially the municipal ones these days. But in terms of respect, some of them are pretty dated and pretty nasty. Paulette, for coming in from Pincher Creek, thanks for joining us today. And I mean, I don't know. It's hard to get good measures necessarily from your own following. When I run Twitter polls, I do things like that from general interest and everything, but they often aren't a reflection of reality. They're just a reflection of who follows me. It seems to be very little love for Premier Kenney in the comment scroll here, though a lot of people watch and they don't necessarily comment. And again, I tire of beating on him. I want some rationed discussion, though. We've got to open it up, get it out there. I wish he'd done it earlier, because the problem is now I don't know if anybody can trust the results. They've done so much twisting and maneuvering and messing around. Even if he gets a large number, it's hard to say if anybody's going to accept it. And as I said, we'll probably see a split caucus again. There's a number of caucus members who've crossed the line of no return. They're not going to stay in there. Shannon saying she's yet to receive her mail-in ballot. There's still a few weeks to go, Shannon, so chances are you will. I like to think you will. I talked with Danielle Smith about that on the show before when they first switched to mail-in ballots. Like, I've been through mail-in ballots before, and on a smaller scale. We did that with the leadership that Danielle won with the Wildrose Party, and there were, I believe, 11,000 people qualified. We processed 8,000 votes, something like that. It was huge. It was a horror story. Getting all the ballots out, getting all the ballots back. Some got lost in mail, some delayed, some showed up weeks after the leadership race was over with. I mean, the only reason that there was not massive mistrust in the outcome of that vote was that Danielle won it so comfortably with those that came in that no amount of outstanding ballots would have changed the outcome at that point. But it's an ugly, difficult system. You can't prove who actually made their mark on that ballot on the other side. You can't prove it. You can't prove that somebody else didn't intimidate that person to make that mark. You can't prove easily where somebody bought their own membership. That's where a lot of questions are coming up right now with things. And that's what's killing the UCP more than everything, I think, is a breaking of trust. That's part of the problem. I see Vince from Alberta see supports Kenney, and see some others are there is some balance. Not everybody is on the ropes with Kenney. I mean, some people feel he's the guy who can turn it around. As I said, too, I really hoped he would have turned out much, much better. I really did. John saying, I thought the mail-in ballot was illegal. I don't know. Brian Jean is back down on his challenges towards it. He's saying he'll accept the results and he's comfortable with how it's being watched. I don't know about illegal, but I mean, the twisting and maneuvering they're doing, it's how do you trust these guys? I mean, if they would do all of this just to keep kicking that can down the road, what would they do if the results turn out the way they don't like? I don't know. We'll see. They've got a lot to make people feel more comfortable with this process to do, and I don't think they've done it. Jennifer saying she hasn't received her ballot yet or her refund for the SGM fees. Because, initially it was $100 a person. They thought they could rig it by making everybody pay $100 to come out and come all the way out to Red Deer. They thought this will do it. And then looked like it wasn't going to win, so they changed the rules. I mean, come on. It's reminds me of way back when I was a kid. And I had a cousin, Craig. I don't know if Craig ever watches this that often. I'm pretty sure it was Craig. Yeah. So he'd make up card games. These great card games, and he'd make up the rules. And then when you try to play a card, he'd say, "No, you can't play that one." Why not? Well, it's on a Thursday. You can't play that one. He would change the rules every time he tried to play a card. didn't matter what you did, that card wouldn't work. It feels a little like that with what the UCP is doing. But let's see, Vince is saying they got a company that's doing mail-in ballots, and they've done it by the CPC. It's a professional company, and yeah, I can believe. Again, they're going to have auditors. I mean, I would hope there's not going to be a big scandal. It's just that with so many moves to try and twist this, though, it just makes it really hard to trust them. It really does. So even if they've given as many scrutineers as possible and checked things and layered it, I got a feeling a lot of people just aren't going to trust those results no matter what happens. We'll see. There's a few weeks to go. Kenney gave his speech. I don't think it turned a lot of people around. I don't think it won a lot of hearts and minds. But some people are supportive of Wells as well. So I'm going to play an interview I had recently with Brett Wilson on this very subject. And you can hear Brett's perspective. I mean, Brett's an Albertan, not everybody agrees with, but he's certainly an established one. As somebody else pointed out, he's very critical of Trudeau. He's certainly not a liberal, whatever Brett Wilson may be. And he speaks from a business perspective. He's been a successful and very well-known businessman. People know him, of course, from his reality TV times as well, and his work in the oil field and his work in charities. He's done a great deal throughout Alberta as a philanthropist as well. So give Brett a listen here and get another perspective on Kenney, because I've already been, beaten on the process and the party enough. And we'll talk to you after that. Well, thank you very much for coming on today, Brett. I really do appreciate it. It's as I said when I invited you, we've got some really tumultuous times provincially in the political scene and such, and a lot of strong views and opinions, including from out of here. And, a lot of people, when it comes to the leadership review with Jason Kenney, they're beating on him pretty hard. They have been for the last couple of years. And I wanted to see some balance. And you've come out and been very supportive of Premier Kenney in this review. And you've come out with something of an endorsement for him.
Yeah, I'm very much aligned with him. I have business interests in Ontario, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC. So I'm actively engaged and have been in the world of COVID, which has been probably the highlight of the challenges that we've all been facing for the last couple of years. And it's been call it the lightning rod for leadership. And I watch the outcomes, and what's been happening in Ontario, a disaster. Saskatchewan, in line with Alberta, and you've seen both Scott Moe and Jason Kenney move very much in lockstep with mandates and passports and vaccination protocols and all those things. They've moved in line, and BC has been an unmitigated disaster. And again, I own a gym, I own restaurants, I own activities in various places, and in Calgary, Alberta has stood head and shoulders above. Have we done things perfectly? No. And part of my frustration is that the medical community is divided. And so if you get professionals who say masks don't work, and professionals who say you need masks for all ages at all times, then they say mandates don't work, that the passports are meaningless. All of these things become interesting when the medical community, who are the thought leaders that we should be able to rely on, are completely divided. And they're not divided in a small range. They're divided to extremes. You watch Joe Vipond, who is obviously carrying an NDP card, ranting and crapping all over every decision that was made. And yet Alberta is bleeding edge in terms of the COVID response for Canada. So who gets the benefit of that? Well, Albertans. Who gets the blame? Kenney. And this is my frustration. The extreme right and the extreme left have crapped all over our leadership, in particular Kenney. I don't see a viable alternative to Kenney. But ignore that. I happen to like the man, not just on a relative basis, but on an absolute basis. As we pivoted and navigated through COVID, I was in trouble. In March of 2020, I'm a lender, I'm a borrower, I'm a landlord, I'm a tenant, and it looked like I was screwed on every level. Over the next couple of months, we renegotiated with banks, we renegotiated with borrowers, we renegotiated with landlords, and we solved our problems. But I got to tell you, I was frustrated and scared at a point in time. And so now we've got people continuously dumping on Kenney in particular, claiming every decision he made was wrong. And yet the reality is, when you look at our economic recovery, which is spectacular and highly anticipated, we all knew that the price of oil would recover when COVID fell behind. The impacts of COVID on supply and demand were obvious, and we all thought that COVID would disappear in a year. It took 2 years, but the recovery, the global recovery of the oil industry is spectacular, and Alberta's participation in that, because we were ready is also spectacular. So to blame our leader for the challenges of COVID is wrong. The division within the party is goofy. I see some of the stupidest commentary. All due respect, I know you guys and certainly the news, Rebel News talks about the pastor that got arrested. Well, there's 10,000 pastors and preachers in Alberta. Only 2 couldn't accommodate working with the system. And those 2 get all the profile, not the other 9,998 who accommodated. So I struggle with the extremes getting all the noise. And the extremes with that noise have undermined the party. And I wouldn't doubt for a moment that the NDP have signed up in spades so that they could vote at this upcoming election, because they're terrified that the reality of a recovering economy in Alberta will solidify the UCP for the future. There's my rant. I can continue, but I'll let you take it wherever you want.
No problem. No, and the economic recovery is certainly going to help. I mean, people feel more comfortable as they're going forward. Something you brought up, though, was Premier Moe in Saskatchewan. As you said, he's been doing well out there as well. His policies, when it came to restrictions and such, very much paralleled Premier Kenney's. But Scott Moe isn't dealing with such internal division and these kinds of problems like Jason Kenney is. I mean, I'm certain he's got activist doctors in Saskatchewan like Vipond out here and others who have been on his case, but it doesn't seem to have stuck to Moe so strongly as it does with Jason Kenney. Why is he having such a difficulty maintaining unity?
Well, that is an interesting parallel, because they have run very much in lockstep, and Saskatchewan has celebrated what they've accomplished. They've punched down, if you will. I think the problem is twofold. One is our medical community was divided, and I blame our medical community, the incompetence of some of the leadership in our medical community. And it's just, I'm not going to name names because it doesn't matter. But if they can't agree, then how can the politicians who have to rely on input? I mean, it's just like economists and business people provide input to the government, and hopefully they respond in a thoughtful way with budgets that accommodate, with royalty systems, tax systems that make sense. But here we are relying entirely upon the medical community, and it can't agree. And even today, you can find a wide disparity of opinions on whether masks work, on whether vaccines work, on whether COVID has any impact on your life or not. You get a wide disparity, and that's the blame that has been dumped on. And that's, I think, so the medical community and the NDP or the left or the woke have captured the flag on waving a flag very inappropriately that says this is all Kenney's fault, and blaming someone who's actually in the driver's seat, who's actually navigated and steered through. I mean, one mistake Kenney made clearly was last July when he announced that Alberta was open for business. I own restaurants here. We were spectacularly delighted, and it went well. It went extremely well. Kenney's mistake that day, though, was he didn't say, we're open until the next variant comes and hits us. And there we were 3 months later with a variant. So he opened and thought we'd be open for good. We all did. We all hoped that. But of course, the moment the variant came, they blamed Kenney for incompetence. Well, no, we adapted, we adjusted, here we are. And by the way, the fact that Calgary today is 30% empty in terms of downtown, that's too bad, because most of the buildings are owned by guys in Toronto. Too bad, so sad. The underlying economy in this province, in this city, is absolutely rocking. And I know that as we're struggling to hire people in all of our businesses. Why are we struggling? Because they're overloaded with opportunity. And that, to me, is where a province should be celebrating, not dividing.
So, I mean, just getting into some more speculation. I mean, I think what all conservatives can agree on is the most horrific outcome we could have is having to say Premier Notley for 4 more years. We just don't want to end up there again.
It'd be the end of our province. It would truly be the end. If the Alberta economy aligned through the NDP with what's happening at the federal level, it's the end of our economy. This nonsense about having only EVs by 2035. We can't power the EVs. We don't have enough charging system infrastructure, let alone the transmission lines to power them. The stupidity of what's happening right now on a national level. And if it was mirrored at a provincial level, wow. And that's where I am worried. I mean, just ranting a bit, I don't see either Brian Jean or Danielle Smith providing leadership that's significantly different in terms of taking Alberta and moving our economy forward, period. It's just, I like them both. They're good people, but I like where Kenney's at right now.
So, I mean, a big challenge Premier Kenney is going to face after this mail-in vote now and the review. assuming he wins it, say with a decent number of 65%, but that's still not going to be enough to really solidify the Hornets underneath them. What do you think he's going to have to do, though, to consolidate? Because, I mean, there's going to be there's a lot of people who have crossed the line of no return within his caucus. There's definitely going to be a divided house, and it just looks so frighteningly similar to what we saw prior to when Rachel Notley won in the past. He's going to have
very much
for him.
No, the shame is on the UCP membership. The shame is on many of the individuals who seek to divide the party. Some of the stuff that's been put up publicly should be discussed privately. Whether it's a family or a business or a political system, there's a lot of this stuff that just has no reason to be in the public domain. And I think some serious mistakes have been made by some of the members, and several have reached out to me saying, how can you possibly support Kenney when he says this and does this? And I'm like, well, yeah, but he said it and he did it. By the way, Jason Kenney is still the only politician in Canada that answers questions. The rest of them all have speaking notes. You ask Justin Trudeau, is today Monday? And he'll talk about the stars and the clouds and the alignment with the planets. He has no concept of what it means to actually answer a question thoughtfully. Kenney has and does. And the fact that we rake him over the coals for being honest as a leader, I'm struggling with that at all as well. So the party is divided. There's a group in the right that has gone extreme, and I'm people are pressing me continuously to be more involved with the true separatist movements. I actually like Kenney's approach on equalization and therefore separation, which is we need a better deal. And if we had a fair deal, a better deal is what it takes to get to a fair deal. But if we had a fair deal in equalization and therefore confederation, many of our problems would be ameliorated. It's that simple.
Yeah, well, those two words, that's one of the areas where I've been frustrated with Premier Kenney was I was very optimistic. I was thrilled when he got elected, and with the Fair Deal panel and the goals that it set out. I mean, going out, as you said, listening and talking, but they really, really dragged their feet on all the recommendations. I'm just wondering maybe if getting out of the gate after this leadership, if we could see some solid action on some of the items that came up with all of that consultation, with all that time with Albertans. Perhaps, if we saw a premier willing to take a stronger stance with Ottawa, not necessarily independence, but some of the people like me might be more comfortable seeing him going forward.
Well, and it's a good point you make. The equalization referendum was somewhere between amusing and confusing. The question was crystal clear, and yet I still have people challenge me that the question didn't make sense. Well, I had no problem with it, and I'm not smarter than the average, but I'm not dumber than the average. We could read the question. The fact that only, 65-70% of Albertans said, yes, we would like a fair deal in equalization is stunning. And the stunning part is the 30% that said, no, we're happy with where we're at. That 30% doesn't think. It's absolutely one of the stupidest. I mean, the fact that we weren't at 90+% is stunning. And I just don't understand that at all. But going back to your point, Kenney has always said that he would do the equalization referendum out at the timing that he did. So when he took office, he told a group of business leaders, I was there, he said it publicly, he said it privately, he was continuously clear that he would do the equalization referendum in due course, a couple of years into his mandate. And no one expected COVID. Nobody, we know that. Nobody expected COVID, maybe except for a lab in Wuhan. But the bottom line is nobody expected that. So the point was that Kenney moved out equalization as a referendum for a couple of years to give him time to solidify the province and set it up for the future. Then the opportunity comes for him to go back to Ottawa and say, look, I have a mandate at 70%, 65, 90, whatever it should have been, could have been. But now I truly do expect, I mean, there's Quebec saying we don't feel like equalizing our the number of people that are in Parliament. We're special. We don't care. Quebec doesn't care about pipelines, doesn't want the fossil fuel industry to exist. So we need to be able to go back and slap, spank, and push Quebec in particular, but the feds as a group in terms of Canada's perspective on Alberta and Saskatchewan as to their role in Confederation. If we can't get a fair deal, I then shift further to the right in terms of the separation movement that says we need a better deal and we're not going to get it staying in Confederation. But I do believe Kenney's the right leader at the right time for this province. That's why I stay where I am.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, the main question, I guess, is going to be post leadership. Who is most likely to stave off the potential of an NDP government. And that's the case that Premier Kenney would have to make to everybody, I think, to keep things from getting too divided. I mean, I do believe a lot of people who are frustrated with him for whatever reason it may be. He opened up too early, he opened up too late, all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good chance they would unify just to say, well, I'm annoyed with him, but darn it, we can't have a repeat of the election back that put Notley in power. But
well, and that's where it goes back to your earlier point, which is there's subterfuge and there's subdivision occurring within the party at the grassroots level. Once we get past this leadership review, my hope is that the economic results, what we're doing in terms of activity, employment, all of the things that personify a great Alberta will be attributed in some small way to the existing leadership.
Yeah, well, and one of our greatest, I think, gifts as conservatives and our greatest flaws is that we speak for ourselves and we're individualists. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fantastic trait, but it makes it increasingly difficult to manage a party. I mean, the left will close ranks even if their leader has done something to upset them, and they'll deal with it inside. Conservatives, well, we're going to pull out the pitchforks, as we saw federally twice now, and we're seeing provincially, which isn't the most productive way to go. I mean, but still, at the same time, you don't want to silently take something if you don't see it. So I'm just hoping, I think a lot of Premier Kenney's challenges too, though, have come with internal management and dealing with his own caucus. And that's going to be up to him to try and soothe those things, assuming he gets past this review. I guess time will tell.
Oh, there's been people issues. We all know that in terms of moving his cabinet around, but none of those are unique to Alberta. Cabinets are shifted and rolled. I mean, you watch what's going on in Ontario, and I just roll my eyes at how can the Conservative movement in Ontario support the hypocrisy and the range of outcomes that occur within the Conservative Party. Well, then you got the Liberal Party federally, and again, we'll avoid that rant.
That's a separate show. Well,
that's a separate week.
Yeah. We've covered a lot of, what I wanted to do today, and I really appreciate it. Like I said, what I do want to see, I mean, I've got my own bias, so that's why I got an opinion show. But I like to see a balance of guests and opinions. And to be honest, it's been hard to find people of profile speaking on behalf of Premier Kenney. And we need to have that if people are going to make an informed choice when they make their membership vote. So I appreciate you coming on and speaking from that perspective today.
Well, and that's where I appreciated the opportunity, because certainly I watch your work. I enjoy your work. Sometimes you're a little further right than I am in my thinking. But again, we're in the same province. And if we can't have a thoughtful conversation as we're doing right now, what's the point?
Well, that's it. We don't have to agree. We just have to have respect. And we've been lacking a whole lot of that lately.
I agree.
All right. Well, thanks again, Brett. Always good to talk to you. And I hope we get the chance again soon. Maybe we'll start dissecting the post-leadership thing down the road here.
Well, I'd be happy to chat about the federal, the parties, the participants running for leadership of the federal party as well. I am terrified of a couple of the members that are running. Anyway, that's another day.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been interviewing a number of them. I've interviewed 5 so far. And I've got a lot of thoughts I could share on what I've concluded. I want to get some more of those interviews in the bag before I kind of really go into it. But we're not seeing some real great shining lights overall out there. Though Poilievre looks interesting for sure.
I'm with you.
All right. Well, thanks again. And we will talk again later.
All right. Thanks for your time.
And just to review, that was, of course, Brett Wilson. People might remember him from the Dragon's Den on TV, and he's been a commentator. He used to go on a lot of shows in the past. I can't remember what it was about, but Brett got canceled a while back in the sense it was back when Daniel Smith had a radio show, and he said something that stirred everybody up, and they said, oh, that's it. He's not coming on ever again. And just a reminder to point out that one of those people who was screaming that Brett could never come on to his show again was Ryan Jesperson back then, who has now managed to get himself canceled by his own viewers, though he's still trying to recover there. Just that reminder to everybody on those lessons, don't feed the cancel mob. It will turn around and bite you later. But again, not everybody, and I've got a lot of people who are commenting who are not supporters of Kenney, but I want to get... It is a discussion. I mean, it's not 100% within that party. I do have a couple of questions kind of for you guys, though. And as we've been seeing in some of the comments, a lot of people aren't thrilled with where Kenney's sitting and where things are standing. But there is that big question, then who? So I'm throwing it out. Let's hope we'll see some comments, guys. We know that Brian Jean and Daniel Smith have clearly expressed interest in running for the leadership of that party. There's got to be some other names to pop up, though. Like, what are some people you would like to see leading that. I mean, I know a lot of people are supportive of completely different parties altogether, but and I'm not in that camp of saying we have to keep Kenney just because we haven't found an alternative yet. I'm not saying that, and I shouldn't say we. I don't have a membership in the party, by the way. I've got my biases, as I said. I'm an opinion person. But who is the one? Saniko saying Paul Hinman. But again, it's a different party. I like Paul. I like Paul a lot. He's been on the show a number of times. I think we could do far worse, than having Paul as a premier. But I don't know if he'd throw his name in that hat. Something, we talked a little bit about when I was on with Brett too, but it's that conservative nature of ours, though. It's our strength and it's our weakness. We're outspoken. We won't just sit and take it if we think the party's going the wrong way, but then we can be prone to tearing ourselves to shreds when push comes to shove from within. I don't want to go the way of the left of just buck up and shut up and let the leader tell you what to do. That's not a good way to go. But what does it take for us to get a movement that can hold together and move ahead? I see two people saying Todd Loewen, and yeah, there's another guy, and Todd, is much like Paul. I worked with Todd a lot with the Wild Rose Party back then. We had an AGM that was held in a community hall way out in Bears Paw. I know Jeff likes talking about it. I think always saying it was the basketball one. We actually had the divider, and you could hear people playing basketball in the next room. And we fed 500 people, I think it was, with burgers. I tell you what, when you are volunteers and you got a community hall kitchen, feeding 500 people is an incredible amount of work. And Todd Loewen was in there. Like, he's a true grassroots guy. He was in there with us flipping burgers and running to Costco to get more supplies and trying to make vats of Caesar salad and everything to feed the people there. This is a guy, Todd is a true, genuine person who came from the ground up. When Todd decided to, cross the floor, well, he basically got kicked out, but when he knew that was going to happen when he spoke up against Kenney, that was more striking than even Drew Barnes. And Drew, I think, is principled as well, but Drew has always been kind of chafing under Kenney's leadership, so it wasn't quite as surprising. And Drew's very outspoken. Todd has always been reserved. When he speaks up, he's one of those ones, he doesn't complain until he's very upset. So when he got to the point of being pushed that far, that said volumes. That said a lot. And that's another name to, and I appreciate that. There's people putting out some names, because we got to have that discussion. If it's not going to be Kenney, then who? And there's other parties, but then, we've been watching that. And we're watching the infighting in the Wild Rose Independence Party. There's been people scrapping there, because that's what we do as conservatives, I'm afraid. The Independence Party of Alberta, which used to be the Alberta Independence Party, which did run an impressive amount of candidates in the last general election, seems to have kind of fallen apart. And they ran a candidate in the by-election in Fort Mac, and I think they got less than 100 votes. It was just a handful of votes. And so they're falling apart. I know people keep saying Alberta Prosperity Project, and okay, so we said Dr. Modry perhaps as a leader. He's not in a party at this point, but he's with the Alberta Prosperity Project. The Alberta Prosperity Project isn't a party, though. So again, we get to that point. If Kenney is no longer leading the UCP, which may indeed be the case in a little over a month, who is going to be next? And that's a big question. And there could be names that show up that we've never heard of. Politics is such a difficult game. People say we want to see someone fresh. We want to see somebody without a political history. Fair enough. But then it's really hard for them to get rolling without having some profile. Like we've got some of these Conservative Party candidates. I've interviewed a couple of them, but they didn't come from within the ranks. They didn't have a seat in the parliament. And they're having a very hard time getting momentum. I mean, people aren't remembering their names. They are having a hard time raising money. They aren't drawing big rallies. So it's difficult to grab somebody without profile, even if you're tired of the same old politicians. But, what are you going to do? We got to start the conversation now. And Shannon Stubbs is another one name thrown out. She's a member of Parliament up north. Shannon used to be actually Danielle Smith's assistant way back in the day. And her father, Bruce Stubbs, as a side note, give you some political trivia. Let's talk about political compromise. Way back in the 90s, when the Reform Party finally fully folded and turned into the Canadian Alliance, there was a group called GUARD, and it was Guardians United Against Reform's Demise. It was people who didn't want the Reform Party to go away, felt we had to stay as a Western party, keep rolling that way, and that was led by Bruce Stubbs, who's Shannon's father. So it's a lot of the same political players in Alberta all the time, and we're always pushing and pulling. that's some of the things we got to remember too before people stomp out of the room in politics, which is something that happens all too much. Is it does take a bit of compromise. You'll lose some battles, you win some battles. If people ask me why you get involved in politics or why do you push, and I'm not in parties anymore, but I'm still interested and I'm still involved in the sense of commentary. It's like a video game that doesn't end though. There's no princess to rescue at the end of the line. There's no finish line. It's never done. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but the game never stops. And if you give up, that's the only thing you can be assured of is you will lose if you give up. So you got to keep active, as frustrating and as annoying as it gets. Let's see, Smith, the vaccine passport saleswoman, Winston saying, I think Danielle Smith was very opposed to vaccine passports, if I recall correctly. I could be wrong, though. I can't speak for Danielle. But I mean, as far as part of what got Smith pushed off the radio was she interviewed people on alternative medications on her radio show, and she looked into some of those things, and she questioned some of the orthodoxy with COVID and with the pandemic, and she got a great deal of pressure from the radio heads and from sponsors and from the cancel mob and the rest that finally pushed her out of conventional media. So whatever, again, if she's the one or not, Danielle's not a pushover when it comes to some of those issues and things like that. She does stand up for herself. Speaking of pushovers, I mean, before I get to my next guest, she'll be a little bit here yet. I want to speak to one of our sponsors again, and that's the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. As we do have to push back, speaking of rights, speaking of staying active, speaking of that video game that never ends. Well, one of the things we have to do is always be on guard, always push for your rights and make sure that you maintain them. And one of those rights is the ability to use and enjoy firearms legally, safely, of course. I mean, if you're going to get violent with people, if you're going to rob people, you're going to shoot at people, that's wrong. And we have laws to address that. But the vast majority of firearm owners are perfectly law-abiding people and they aren't harming anybody. But you wouldn't know it with the way the Liberal government treats them because they are constantly trying to take away their property, trying to take away their firearms. They keep making new laws. They keep changing the categorization of firearms and trying to take them away. Well, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association is pushing back. They have a number of legal challenges on behalf of firearm owners, standing up for your rights. And they can only do it, though, if you support them, right? You're only going to protect yourself if you get up and protect yourself. So check them out. The Canadian Shooting Sports Association is, if you own firearms, you should be, it's also an association in that you can network with other firearm owners. There's resources, whether it's videos on safe firearm use, different sports, trade shows that are coming up, all sorts of stuff like that. Check them out. Canadian Shooting Sports Association. It's CSSA-CILA.org. Take out a membership with them because, hey, your rights, if you don't stand up for them, you're going to lose them. You're going to lose them. And again, it's, let's see, you can use firearms in equal force. Some people are saying the sound's a bit choppy. I know it was when Mr. Wilson was on it. I think he had a loose connection on his end. I think we should be coming in pretty clearly to you now. Hopefully it's not quite as choppy at this point. It was just, that's one of the things being live and having people on remote interviews is we can get those technical issues now and then. So, here we're seeing some other interesting stories. And again, I know some of the commenters weren't always happy with police in general and everything, but demoralizing police and getting on their case and constantly telling them they should be ashamed of themselves doesn't make them any more receptive or better or respectful of our rights in general. I've been very much annoyed and upset with the pushing of the removal of the thin blue line patches. And we've got some officers now that are standing up to, and they're just saying, no, it's not happening. We've done it. We've hit that line where you've pushed us back far enough, and we're just not taking them off. It's a symbol now. And the Western Standard, it's a story you can find in the Western Standard online, spoke with two active CPS officers, Calgary, and they had to stay anonymous because they couldn't get they could be fired. They could get in trouble. That's the way it's sitting. And the first officer said he's been with the CPS for less than 10 years, and he wanted to serve and protect. He's a person who was drawn to being a police officer. When he was asked what the thin blue line symbols, because that's what's coming down to, is what does it mean? Somebody else, that the woke, crazy left is reading into this symbol something else that it doesn't mean at all. This gentleman said it's supposed to be a symbol to remember our fallen brothers and sisters. And he just wants to make sure that they always remember it's that thin blue line between good versus evil, and it's not police versus citizens, because they're citizens as well. He says it represents brotherhood. And it hurts these guys. And, when he was asked, well, what do you think of it being racist or somehow reflective of white supremacist values? And he said, so myself and some of my other colleagues that are of color think it's ridiculous. He said, I'm a visible minority and I 100% support and back the thin blue line. When they say the symbol is racist, come on. There are police officers from every race out there, and many of them support that symbol because it's their brothers, sisters, compatriots who are getting injured, who do get killed occasionally, who are suffering PTSD, a lot of the things, whether you like police or don't like police, they've got a lot of challenges. And to take away that one gesture that they can wear and say that it's inappropriate and label them ridiculously. I mean, think of that, non-white officers, and you're calling them white supremacists. But we've hit that point. We've hit that point where if you push against the woke, it doesn't matter. They immediately throw that at you. And it's a problem. So they're hanging on to that symbol. And so people saying, well, they shouldn't wear anything. Well, maybe if we want to go that route. But you know what? They wear the rainbow ribbons during Pride Week. They wear all sorts of other woke symbols that the left would be pretty pissy and upset if the police officers remove those as well. So do you allow them to make gestures as part of the community or not? And the thin blue line one is a benign one that is wrongly being labeled as an extreme symbol. And it's stupid. And it's got to stop. And it's demoralizing. And unfortunately, that actually leads to more of the problems, because when you get demoralized police, then you can get police who act out and do things wrong. All right. Enough pissing and moaning out of me. Let's bring in the Western Standard's Edmonton Bureau Chief, Rachel Emmanuel, who's been up there for just about a couple of weeks now, I guess. And hey, how's it going, Rachel?
I'm doing well today.
Good, good. So you're in the legislative office now, are you?
Yes, I am.
Great. So it's been, about 10 days since you've settled in up there. How are you liking life in the Alberta center of governance?
Sure. Yeah, it hasn't actually been quite 10 days. This is just my second week. I began in the legislature last Monday. So I guess technically, I worked on weekends. So I guess we're getting there. It's been really good. I'm enjoying myself quite a bit. It's nice to be going into the office again every day after working from home for 2 years. So I'm enjoying that. However, the legislature isn't actually sitting this week or last week. So it's been pretty quiet, which has actually been quite nice to just have some time to get myself up to speed on everything and kind of figure out where everything is. So I'm definitely really enjoying it. And I'm really excited to be here as well.
Great. Yeah, well, the news doesn't stop just because they aren't in session. One of your more recent stories in pointing out, Brian Jean was sworn in last week, and he did say that the UCP approved him, and he's on the mailing list now. So they've given Jean an office there, and he's a functional MLA.
Yeah, he's a functional MLA right now. I think it would be a tricky matter for them to kick him out of the caucus, but I guess it's sort of a lose-lose situation for them. You kick him out, you make him a martyr, but you have him in, and you have sort of someone who's working against the leader within the party. So definitely a tricky situation there, but it seems like he's in for now. Doesn't sound like he has the most direct communication with Premier Kenney. I think he said in that press conference the last time he had spoken to Kenney directly was about 4 years ago. So it'll be interesting to see those two attempt to work together. I'm definitely excited for things to get into full swing here at the legislature and to see how that all plays out.
Yeah, well, once it does get back in session, you're going to be in the midst of quite a bit of political intrigue, at least to keep you reporting on. When does it come back in session? Is it after the Easter weekend, I imagine?
Yeah, so should be back next week, according to the schedule. So that'll be really nice. I mean, right now it seems like the leadership review is dominating so much of what the discussion is. And in terms of what we're covering for the Conservatives, certainly that's quite a bit of it. There's been some other stuff as well, but that's really the story everyone's watching right now. And you'll notice in the NDP's attack lines, that's a sort of common focus point for them, that the government's distracted on holding on to power and they're not doing any real work. And certainly with NDPers that I've spoken to, that's something that they're very concerned about. They say this government is really busy, focused on just maintaining, their leader and everyone keeping their jobs, and they're not actually pushing a lot of stuff forward. So that's a complaint that I've been hearing. So I'm interested to see what will happen when the legislature returns and we can actually see what sort of, laws and bills are being debated in the chamber.
Yes, I guess there's no committee work going on this week either, then.
No.
Have you had a chance to meet the independent members kind of hanging over in the corner there with Drew Barnes and Todd Lowen?
Yeah, I've sent out some emails and I've set up some coffees when everyone's back, but most people are actually back in their ridings right now. I've been sort of looking through MLA's Facebook pages. It seems like a lot of people have town halls planned for the past 2 weeks, which makes sense. They're back in their riding. It's a good opportunity for them to meet with constituents and hear their concerns. So, like I said, there's actually not a lot of people in the legislature currently. It's quite empty when you walk around the hallways. It's a little bit eerie. So, yeah, I'm excited to see what will happen when we're in full swing. And when people are back in Edmonton, I'm sure I'll be meeting with people quite a bit more frequently.
Yeah, well, and you're reporting on other things in Edmonton on our behalf as well, of course, up there for the Western Standard. There's one of your stories was on a report offering recommendations on a Constable Woodall's murder in Edmonton. What was that story? If you want to expand on it.
Yeah, so I guess that was a really big story in Edmonton when this constable was murdered, when he showed up to do an arrest at someone's house with four of his colleagues, and the arrest did not go very smoothly. And the person who they were planning to arrest wouldn't come out of his house, and so they had to wait to get a warrant to break in. And meanwhile, they tried to pick the lock, and the individual inside actually ended up shooting through the door. And the individual who was murdered, Constable Woodall, this picture was just up there on the screen. He was shot multiple times, and he was unable to take cover when the rest of the officers sort of fled and took cover behind their police cars, and he ended up dying. So that was back in, I want to say, 2014 or 2015. It was, yeah, so 6 years ago. And so there's been lots of reviews and reports that have come out on this story since then, but this was one of the last ones, and it just offered some final recommendations on the process. Like I said, there'd already been reports done, and the judge who was doing the report agreed with many of the recommendations and policy changes that had already been implemented to basically avoid a situation like this ever happening again. But he did have a couple other recommendations, and his main one was, they were there for the arrest. Things weren't going very smoothly. Would it have been better for them to say, this isn't going to work out today? Maybe we should go home and try this again on a different day. And it's tough to say if that would have been the case or not, because obviously this individual was armed and now he was agitated. So if they had left and gone home that day, would he have, maybe taken his anger out on his neighbors? He had firearms in his house. What could have happened? So there was definitely a speculative element to it. But he was saying, I think going forward, police officers need to kind of constantly reevaluate the situation, see if tensions are escalating, and just basically determine whether they think it's the best situation to continue to proceed with an arrest, or if we should go home and continue for another day. He wasn't saying they should have gone home that day. He was just saying, going forward, that's something that we should consider. So yes, as you mentioned, I'm here also be covering some Edmonton stories as well, not just Alberta stuff. So there's definitely lots to do. I even attended a Leslyn Lewis campaign event on Saturday, and Pierre Poilievre is coming to town on to Thursday. So I will see him in Edmonton as well.
Great. How was the Leslyn Lewis event? Is it well attended?
It was very well attended. She had a full gymnasium packed with people. She's pulling really big crowds. I know out west, she's very popular. I believe a lot of her support in the previous leadership campaign came from Alberta and Saskatchewan. She's, of course, a social conservative, so she's very popular in these areas, but it was an enormous crowd. Hundreds of people were there. And she's been pulling really big crowds from what I've seen throughout her time in Alberta. So it was an exciting event, and I'm sure, Pierre will probably pull an even bigger crowd on Thursday.
Yeah, Poilievre will be going Tuesday here. I'll be watching one, and you'll be watching the one on Thursday, and he's really setting things up. But it's interesting to see Lewis pulling such a large amount as well. I mean, right now it seems to be a battle of words, and it's getting pretty harsh between Poilievre and Charest. But if they start fighting over the same conservative base out west, we might see more development in the campaign with those two kind of getting a little more direct in their campaigns with each other, I imagine.
Yeah, I suppose that's always a possibility. I mean, when you're competing, you are competing against the other candidates in the race. However, these two seem to have just a very mutual respect. Actually, something I've observed is it seems that all the other candidates really hold quite a bit of respect for Leslyn Lewis. She is a very good campaigner, and she presents herself in a very professional manner, and she's not offensive. I think one of the things I heard commented on from the last leadership campaign is that her and Derek Sloan, who is no longer in federal politics, now he runs the Ontario Party, they're both social conservatives, but she delivered her views in a more palatable way. So people have really respected that about her and appreciated her professionalism. And also she's been very impressive with just how quickly she's been able to fundraise. That's sort of what got her so much attention in the previous conservative leadership campaign, just how much money she was able to fundraise for being relatively unknown. So she definitely carries a lot of weight in the Conservative Party. I don't know that I would say that I think she'll win, but she's very well respected by her colleagues. And I would expect her to have, a good place in the party.
Yeah, the candidates would be poorly served to underestimate her this time. I mean, Lewis was dismissed in the last leadership race kind of initially. Nobody really thought she was going to go anywhere aside from representing a small constituency. And in the end, she was one of the most competitive candidates of them all. So, I mean, this time around, she's working on that base that she got to build last time. It would be foolish to dismiss her at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to see what she does. I'm excited to see what kind of numbers she pulls and how late she stays on the ballot. And of course, whatever position she'll have following the leadership race. I think it would be a mistake, as you said, for any leader not to, give her a high position within the Conservative Party. She's proven herself to be an excellent organizer, an excellent campaigner, and an excellent fundraiser, which is extremely important in politics, of course.
Great. And then, so another story, something kind of broke last week, but we're kind of reviewing on a Monday, was the federal government did approve the Bay du Nord project off of Newfoundland, which is great because I mean, they could use the funding and the jobs out there in Newfoundland, but at the same time, they said a Suncor expansion is unacceptable. And did you get much legislative response? Like, is there an effort to defend ourselves? It just seems again, Alberta oil bad, Eastern oil good. Alberta oil bad, Russian oil good. Uh, has there been some discussion in the legislature on what might be a response to that yet?
Sure. So I did initially hear I was going to get a response from the energy minister, but they didn't end up coming with anything because the budget broke on the same day. And I think that was their focus at that time. However, the Suncor projects could still go ahead. Basically, at this point, they have resubmitted saying they need a 9-month extension to submit their sort of impact assessment proposal, which will just show the impact of the project on the environment. I'm wondering if they maybe sensed that it was going to be rejected and they thought, let's just give ourselves a little more time to work on this. So they said they're going to continue working with the government on sort of new regulations that have come out and making sure their project is in line with that, as well as with Indigenous groups and other stakeholders. So I think they're still hoping to get approval on this project at some point. They have another 9 months to resubmit things. And Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault said at this time, their project is unacceptable was the exact terminology he used in his letter to Suncor, just due to the amount of emissions that we were going to see from it. So it is possible we could see it be approved in another, 9 months to a year. But currently at this time, it's not going to get the green light.
Yeah, well, and I find it, I was surprised that Guilbeault even approved the one in Newfoundland, to be honest, but I'm glad he was. I don't anticipate he's ever going to willingly approve something in Alberta, though financial reality may force that to change. I guess we'll watch as that goes. It's good to know it's not completely shelved then, even if 9 months is just, we delay ourselves to death with these things. So something you've got to look forward to, I saw in Edmonton as well. I don't think you've written on it, but was they've banned the spraying for mosquitoes coming up this summer. I don't know if you've done a summer in Edmonton yet, but there's a lot of river and water bodies and spots. I imagine, well, I know some people up there are quite upset about it. I mean, they're not feeling it yet, but you guys are going to be, you better stock up on that repellent because in about a month or so, you're going to be feeling it.
Yeah, I haven't written about that. I did see that story was covered. I also had seen that City Council had apparently passed something similar. I believe it was a year or two ago. And then when they saw the weather that was coming in, it was like quite a rainy and wet season. They ended up reversing the motion and they said, we're going to go ahead with the mosquito spraying anyways. So I did put a question to the member that had actually introduced that motion and said, is this something that you'll consider? And he kind of was just like, well, I think there's other alternatives that we need to consider. But I didn't get a firm no. So I'm wondering, if we're expecting to get quite a wet season, I'm sure people would be happy for them to introduce the mosquito spraying again this year. So that's something to keep your eye out for. Of course, city councilors, they're always listening to their constituents. If people are concerned about it, their best option would be to email their constituents or call their office directly to let them know. I have never experienced a summer in Edmonton. I hate mosquitoes. Who doesn't? So I guess we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I imagine it's Councillor Jans, I guess you were reaching out to there. You'll get to know all of the Edmonton City Council over the weeks and months to come. What are you working on then through this week? What kind of stories can we look forward to while you sit through that legislative break for the moment to help you reestablish yourself?
Sure. So one story that I have written, I think that actually one of my most read stories since I've been covering Edmonton was a UCP MLA, Cyril Turton had done a contest. He was going to do like an Easter coloring contest. You could submit a drawing of something and you could win like an Easter basket. And his riding is actually, or district, I guess it would be called here, Grace Life Church falls into that district. And you might remember their pastor was arrested for continuing to preach and not abiding by COVID-19 restrictions during the pandemic. So his members from his church actually showed me a picture of a drawing they drew. It was of Alberta Premier Kenney giving 2 thumbs up, saying, I arrested more pastors than any other Western district. And then he says, Happy Easter at the bottom of it. So the irony there was just, so all of a sudden, it's fine for us to celebrate our religious holidays and let's support and promote religious freedoms. But, we've actually had pastors arrested for this in Alberta. So that was sort of the irony there. So I believe that contest may have been canceled. The post appears to have been deleted off of Facebook. So I'm trying to get an answer on that. I thought that was interesting and something obviously, our readers are curious about. As well, I'm using this week to still do some federal stories. I came from Ottawa. I still have some interest in some federal stories. There's some interesting pieces of legislation being discussed there. And since it is a break week here in Alberta, it's a good time to do those stories and get them out of the gate while I can.
Great. Yeah, that was kind of a careful what you wish for sort of story with the UCP. They asked for it and they received it. Perhaps Mr. Turton will respond soon. He's usually a fairly responsive MLA, but again, they're in sensitive times right now with the whole leadership fiasco going on. But as you get to know them all, you'll have no shortage of things to cover. Sometimes the fun little side stories, well, as you said, they draw more traffic than some of the deeper policy dives. We need to lighten up a little bit now and then. So that's appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that was sort of just like a fun, interesting story. And I think it's one of those sayings that every time a politician does something, like there's going to be someone who wants to criticize it. You sort of are, taking abuse from every side. I heard it described once as being a little bit of like a political pinata. Certainly not a position that I envy, but I did think the irony of the story was rather funny. So I thought it was, noteworthy and decided to write about it anyways.
Great. Well, thank you very much for taking some time to check in with us today. We'll look forward to seeing you continue to write from up in Edmonton there on all those provincial and federal issues, and we'll talk again soon.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks very much for having me.
Great. Thanks. So yes, that's our Edmonton Bureau Chief, Rachel Emmanuel, and she's taken things over up in there, and there will be lots to write on. It's probably good to have this break through the legislature to help her settle in and get used to things in the office. If it was in the midst of a session, it's kind of hard to find your feet and get to know all the players really and the characters within it. It's great to have somebody on the ground in the legislature, though, because you want to speak to all sides. We've got a number of parties. The NDP, sure, they drive most of us bananas, but they're in there. They're elected officials. They might, heaven forbid, but they might be the next government. So we need to be in communication. We need to report on them. We need to see what they're up to. And having folks on the ground there in the legislature is, of course, our way to do that. And Rachel is doing that job. And what's this? Stephen saying, when will Western Standard hire a gun from Rebel News? Well, I don't think Ezra is looking to give up Sheila anytime soon. She's comfortable over there at Rebel. We'll expand as we go, but it's interesting questions coming in that direction. Rebel covers another area, getting alternative media and more stuff and getting more direct lines, original content is important. So I'm going to speak one more time about one of our sponsors before I talk some more about some news, and that's how we do it. And that is, again, Bitcoin Well. These guys are an Alberta company. As I said earlier, they help lead us into the digital currency world. Maybe that sounds a little wrong, but they help guide us. There's a better word for it. And because, again, it's a nebulous thing. It's new. It's different. And you're not sure. You worked hard for that money. It's bad enough that you got the government taking big bites out of it and trying to take it. And you've always got scam artists who worry about other ones. Well, BitcoinWell.com is a publicly traded company. They got ATMs throughout the West. They're established. They give one-on-one service. Like they're for real. They're not some crazy ripoff or a call center on the other side of the planet or anything like that. You want one-on-one service, they've got it for you with a real person, face-to-face, because it's your investments. It's important. And this can help hedge you against inflation. This is a different way to get out of the regular currency markets. And they've got other plans. I just like to talk about that with the corporate plans, which I think is really cool. We're doing that at the Western Standard. They'll set up your company with it if you want. Where we take, and it's voluntary for employees, of course, a percentage of our income, our check every month goes into a Bitcoin wallet. And then the Western Standard matches that. So every month, a little matched percentage of my income goes into a little Bitcoin wallet, and I get a side savings, a little hedge of my bets, and a little more money off to the side. These guys set things up like that. They make digital currency practical. They make it usable, make it easy to save it and easy to use it. As I said earlier, you can pay your online bills with it, your utility bills, your credit cards, use it like any other currency. And these guys are the ones that help facilitate that sort of thing. Somebody else thinking Edmonton's mayor is a tyrant, Frankie Boucher there. Yeah. And that's so he's, I don't know how to describe him. He was a former federal energy minister. It shows the Liberals' desperation on putting people in cabinet because they put him in energy because he's the only Alberta guy they have, but he didn't know a bloody thing about energy. He did a terrible job with it. And now he's the mayor of Edmonton. We can't get on a high horse in Calgary because we put Jody Gondek in as the mayor over here, and it's not exactly as if she's been doing a bang-up job for us all to this point either. But I'm looking forward to expanding our Edmonton coverage, though. These city councils, we let our municipal politics in every city, Saskatoon, Edmonton, Regina, Vancouver. We forget about these guys, and we shouldn't, because these politicians actually have a heck of a lot more impact on your life than usually the provincial or federal ones, much more directly. They're the ones that deal with the property, your household, with, even if it sounds as minor as garbage pickup, fire departments, police departments, and they take a lot of your taxes. And in Calgary, in a lot of areas, they dump it into ridiculous things, crappy public art, vanity projects, stupid green projects. I mean, they kill business. Yet we give them a pass. Most people couldn't name their local city councilor. The turnout in municipal elections is often like 30%. It's embarrassingly low. I think in Calgary, we've seen it as low as 20 sometimes. It's been a little higher recently because we've had some turnover, but we got to watch these guys because they will impact you. They impact you a lot, and they like sliding under the radar. That's how they could get away with things. A provincial politician, a federal one, they got the party, they got the public relations machine. They're always out in the news. They're front and center. But these municipal ones, guys, they're screwing you just as much or more. And you think of, if there's cases, I'm not pointing at any single one at all or saying that they're necessarily corrupt. I tell you see some of your worst corruption cases in municipal politics. This is a smaller group of people with access to a whole lot of taxpayer money and a whole lot of authority on things like sole source contracts for everything from road construction to crime to garbage pickup to things like that. If you look to some of Montreal's municipal history to see how well that goes. So, as people are saying, getting somebody up in Edmonton to cover that aspect in Alberta is great. We've got Chris Oldcorn out in Saskatchewan. He's been writing on the legislature out there. He's been doing great. I should get him on the show again soon. And perhaps he'll talk a little more about the municipal end there. I know it bores you sometimes, folks. And I'm not just talking about the Calgary one. That's why I want to talk about a lot of them, because everybody's got a municipal government, no matter where you live. But they're problematic almost everywhere you go to. I've always kind of thought that we should get a partisan system in municipal politics. It's not a catch-all. It doesn't save everything. When we see the mess that the UCP's in, or we see some of the other battles, people say, well, do you really want to see that municipally? I don't want to see the internal battles, but I don't know if we can get much worse than what we got right now. I mean, what we get so often is they sneak in under the radar. They campaign right and they govern left. Nenshi was in for 10 years. He was a very, very left-wing person, but he campaigned as a conservative. He came in saying, I'm pro-business, I'm pro-small government, I'm pro-efficiency. It was all baloney. And once he was in, he just stayed in and governed as a lefty. And again, voter apathy kept him in. They wouldn't get off their butts to kick him out of there. Gondek, well, we always kind of knew she was from the left. I'll give her credit there. But still, I mean, the wackadoodle left she went in her first months when she got in there. And it is showing that she's got the lowest mayoral support in the first 6 months of office that we've seen in decades, if not generations. But we got to watch these guys. They're going to keep hitting you. Here's that other story Dave talked about earlier. There was a big poll done. Again, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. These massive polls these guys do. Boy, the pollsters have got a good gig sometimes. And that's talking about worry that the pandemic will never end. A majority of Canadians worry the impact of the pandemic is never going to end. And this is an in-house research by the Department of Health. Young Canadians were most upset at the prospect of perpetual disruption of their everyday life. That's because, unfortunately, a lot of the young people are accepting that these lockdowns are normal. They're accepting that these are effective. They're accepting that we should live with these. And this was from Matthew out in Ottawa, our writer out there. That's unfortunate. The youth are the ones being programmed the most. I mean, when you go around, I go shopping, I hit Superstore, I hit the other spots, and we've seen it progressively since the mask mandates dropped. The first week after the mask mandates dropped, it'd be 30-40% of the other shoppers had no masks. And week by week, there were fewer and fewer. Now I go out shopping, and it's maybe 10-15% of people are still wearing masks in there. But those that you do see wearing them are usually young. And these are the people least vulnerable. I mean, if you read the statistics, if you look at the way COVID works, guys, you've got very little to worry about here. You shouldn't be sweating it, but they're the ones most frightened. But they're also more accepting that we're always going to be dealing with this disruption. Well, hang on. Like, you're half right, guys. You're half right. But half right can be terribly dangerous. COVID-19 is never going away. We've got to accept that. That's Absolutely. And that's what some legislators and more people are figuring out. And they've got to figure out, no matter how much we lock down, no matter how much we screw Canadians, no matter how many people you bankrupt, no matter how many families you divide, the bug isn't going away. Not a single country on the planet has gotten rid of it yet, no matter how hard they crack down. You can't legislate a bug away. In China, somebody else mentioned that in the comment scroll earlier. We're seeing those videos. It's insane what's going on over there. They are locking people in their homes, in their apartments. People are screaming from balconies. They're imprisoned because this thing, now into its third year, is still making the rounds. Guys, you won't stop it. But you can sure mess with people a hell of a lot when you try. We have to accept that it's going to be here. It's staying here. Let's mitigate it. When you see a big outbreak, lock down the vulnerable. How about that? Quit trying to lock down the healthy. Quit trying to shut down the low-risk people, and let's protect the vulnerable, just the way we always did with the flu. We have to start treating it that way, or we're just running in circles and hurting ourselves. When we listen to that rotten mainstream media, and they are rotten. Oh, CTV just kills me. I swear, and I watch those shows because I got to keep up with the news. Keep funding us, guys. I appreciate your sponsors. Maybe we can get the Western Standard News every night, so when I have supper, I can watch the Western Standard News and not have to deal with that to keep up with events and everything. But it's like they're celebratory. They do not want this pandemic to go away. They just like it, and they raise the fear. Oh, look at this. We got wastewater levels are up. The pandemic's on the rise. We've got to lock down. And of course, they might speak to one politician who says, actually, no, it's looking pretty good. And what are they going to do? They'll go right out to some haywire doctors and we've got to lock things down. They'll find another Vipon. They'll find another expert somewhere, a biologist somewhere. They just do not want us to feel comfortable. And it's transparent. Watch it sometime. Watch it sometime. One of their favorite things to do. We watched that when they reopened, when we were taking down the restrictions, when they do Main Streeting. So you get out, you send some poor reporter, because that's a rotten task to do. You get on the street and ask members of the public what they think on an issue. Just supposedly randomly get out there and ask them. That's one of the favorite areas where you can skew news coverage, because you interview 30 people, you pick the 5 to make the cut that say what you want to hear, and you ignore the rest. So when they got rid of the vaccine passports in Alberta, for example, finally, so you could go into a restaurant without having to show your QR code. CTV was out there on the streets talking to, are you scared about this? And lo and behold, all 5 people they found were scared. Oh yes, I'm very scared. I don't think I'll go to businesses if they don't have a vaccine passport. I don't think I'm going to stop wearing my mask. I'm very scared. I don't think the government's going the right way. Really, getting out there, that's all you could find was a few people saying that they wanted to keep the vaccine passports. Amazing. And then there was that one virtue signaling bar in Calgary on 17th Avenue, that hipster bar, said they followed and believed almost, that rotten crap out of Calgary's Chamber of Commerce with the non-business person who runs that, saying people prefer the passports. They feel more comfortable and they'll go out and spend their money as long as they got the passports. Complete baloney, complete crap. And this bar on 17th believes that we're going to virtue signal, we're going to keep this passport, even if we don't have to, if the government doesn't want to. Guess what? Within weeks, they got rid of it because people voted with their dollars. Don't believe the mainstreaming. Don't believe the BS out of the mainstream media saying that everybody out there is afraid, saying that everybody out there wants this crap. They don't. They don't. So don't pay attention. But you can still watch those things. Just make sure you see through what they're up to and how they're doing that. It's just a way to manipulate news, and the more you see them doing it, the worse it is. Again, hey, this is an opinion show. I never deny it. I've got my bias. I'm wrong on some things. Don't worry, you guys let me know when I am. But when it comes to news content, it has to be, if you got principles, you're trying to give it balance, guys. And Dave here in the newsroom makes sure he's very careful about that as our news editor. He makes sure our reporters stick to the facts on their stories. And we aren't going to Main Street and try and build a BS basis for people's points of view on their behalf. But unfortunately, our mainstream outlets that really just seem to like this pandemic are trying their hardest to maintain that ongoing fear of what's going on with the pandemic. And we should be very concerned about it. Let's see some other things. So here's some mixed blessing. We talk about business. We talk about inflation. Talk about what we got to look forward to, as if COVID wasn't bad enough in the pandemic. And it's funny because the virus never hurt our economy a bit, by the way. Let's just break that myth off the start, too. The virus can't do a thing to your economy. It can't. It's a virus. It can do things to you. It can't do a thing to your economy. Government responses are what screwed the economy, guys. That's what did it. Government shutting down businesses, government screwing up supply chains, government putting people out of work, government making people afraid, staying home. That is what hurts the economy. A virus is powerless against an economy. It can't do anything. So we've done that. We've made a mess of the economy. We've made a mess of our supply chains. And now we've got the mess in Ukraine and Russia. And I mean, aside from one side or the other, what do you agree with in Russia and Ukraine? The problem that now is coming down, though, people know how Eastern Europe, I mean, Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe. It always has been. Huge farm areas and community. And they're one of the world's top exporters of corn, sunflower oil, and wheat. Well, of course, let's see, Bloomberg thinks there's going to be a 50% decline in crop output this year. This is going to shoot the cost of food through the roof. We aren't even seeing it yet. I mean, costs are already going up. My parking space was up another $1 a day, actually, when I checked in this morning to park for the day. Everything's going up. And I tell you what, food, you haven't even seen it go up yet. Now, if you're a Canadian producer, that kind of could do okay because commodity prices are going to go up and you're going to sell your wheat and your canola and your other things for a better rate. But for people and consumers in general and in Europe, especially areas that were served by Ukraine and that, this is going to be really problematic, and this is going to be a big problem. We better, I don't know, guys. I'd just say stock up on your non-perishable goods, and please stop spamming the comment area, guys. I understand you want to share information with each other, but one person commenting 12 times with the same link is not appropriate. So cut it out. We got to talk with each other and keep things open. I like sharing, but let's not blast it all out that way. So we've covered quite a bit today, guys, and we've got a bunch more coming in tomorrow. I'm going to have Lindsay Wilson from Alberta Proud coming in. She's going to talk on some issues. They've been a group with a large following online. They're not a party, but they are a group, and they have a good following, and we're going to discuss some provincial issues. And I mean, Alberta Proud, the name kind of speaks for itself there. And Mike Thomas is going to come in. He's a Western Standard columnist, and he's been in a number of times talking about real estate and a number of other issues. Because again, real estate, that's one of those big purchases that affects everything you do. And that seems to be what the big federal government was all about. It was all about how the feds are going to make your houses affordable, which I don't really believe, and I don't think they're competent to do it, but that's what they're talking about. And they'll spend a lot of your money trying to do it. So I got those two great guests coming in tomorrow. As well, of course, we'll cover the news, whatever issues are coming up. I'll figure out what's got me triggered ranting. Hey, send me any tips, ideas, guest suggestions at Cory C. Morgan at westernstandardonline.com or at Twitter, Cory B. Morgan. Thank you all for joining us today, guys, and I will see you tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. sharp.